How big of a mess can one person make? How about nearly wrecking a brand new destroyer, a ship North Korea had pinned its hopes on, right in front of the dear leader himself? For whichever North Korean engineer was responsible for the recent launch accident, this was likely the last and biggest mistake of their career. While operational error is the immediate cause of the incident, the deeper reason is Kim Jong Un's excessive push for leapfrog development in the North Korean Navy. The root of this ambition and the critical threat it seeks to address lies in the unresolved issue of the West Sea Five Islands, a problem that has plagued North Korea since the end of the Korean War. When the Korean War Armistice Agreement was signed, the United States, unable to defeat the Chinese Volunteer Army on land, largely conceded to the Sino-North Korean demands for the land border and the establishment of the demilitarized zone. However, the agreement failed to specify the maritime border between the two Koreas. The Korean peninsula has a complex coastline with numerous offshore islands. Because the U.S. had total naval supremacy, many islands geographically north of the 38th parallel remained under its control throughout the war. After the armistice, neither the U.S. nor South Korea was willing to give up these islands. So, in August 1953, military officials led by U.S. General Mark Clark unilaterally drew a maritime demarcation line without North Korean consent. On the East Coast, the line was a simple extension of the land border and caused few disputes. But in the West, it was a different story. The geography there is tricky. The South Korean coast runs north to south, while the North Korean coast runs east to west. The line drawn by the U.S. and South Korea followed this east-west orientation, with the result that North Korea's southwestern coast runs right up against the border. Furthermore, because South Korea controls several islands along this line, including Bangyong, Daecheong, and Yongkyang Islands, it effectively forms a naval blockade against North Korea. For South Korea, this line, known as the Northern Limit Line, or NLL, secures the Ganghwa Bay and prevents a potential amphibious assault like the famous Incheon landing. For North Korea, the situation is intolerable. The westernmost island controlled by the South, Bangyong Island, is over 100 kilometers from the South Korean mainland, but less than 20 kilometers from North Korea. Despite this, North Korea didn't react forcefully in 1953. Its navy was hopelessly outmatched, and it was focused on post-war reconstruction. To the U.S. and South Korea, silence meant consent. They designated the line the Northern Limit Line, and the South began regular patrols.
North Korea's initial quiet was based on two factors. First, its navy was too weak to challenge the U.S. and South Korea. Second, it still held out hope for peaceful reunification and viewed the line as a temporary military ceasefire line, not a permanent border. For over 2 decades, from 1953 to 1976, the seas remained relatively calm. But as relations soured in the 1970s, driven by South Korean President Park Chung-hee's rapid military buildup and anti-communist stance, North Korean leader Kim Il-sung concluded that peaceful reunification was no longer possible in the short term. The issue of the West Sea Five Islands was finally put on the table. Kim Il-sung didn't demand sovereignty over the islands. Instead, he proposed redrawing the maritime border. The North Korean plan, called the Southern Warning Line, extended the land border southwest instead of due west, giving the North control over parts of Ganghwa Bay. To show goodwill, the plan even included narrow sea lanes to connect the South Korean-held islands to the mainland. Objectively, the 1976 proposal was a reasonable compromise that respected both geography and South Koreans' interests. However, Park Chung-hee's South Korea held naval superiority and had no interest in changing a status quo that favored them. They ignored the proposal. Kim Il-sung, wary of the cost of war, didn't press the issue. At the time, the North Korean Navy was an asymmetric force, composed mainly of Soviet-supplied submarines designed to counter an invasion, not project power. Meanwhile, South Korea, thanks to Park's economic plans, had become a world-class shipbuilding nation. Its navy rapidly expanded with new destroyers and frigates, making an already sensitive North Korea even more paranoid. After Kim Il-sung's death and the devastating famine that followed the collapse of the Soviet Union, his successor, Kim Jong Un, began using friction with the South to distract from internal problems. The maritime dispute quickly escalated into a series of violent clashes. In 1999, the two navies fought the First Battle of Yongpyong. Eager for revenge after a tactical defeat, Kim Jong-il launched a surprise attack during the 2002 World Cup, leading to the Second Battle of Yongpyong. After these clashes, both sides beefed up their military presence in the area. When North Korea conducted its first nuclear test in 2006, South Korea became even less willing to compromise. The situation boiled over in November 2010. After South Korea fired artillery shells into the disputed waters during a military exercise, a furious North Korea responded by shelling a South Korean artillery base on Yongpyong Island. This event brought the maritime issue to the forefront and triggered a major military buildup. South Korea established a new command for the islands, deploying K-9 self-propelled howitzers and cruise missiles. North Korea countered by deploying more artillery and anti-ship missiles and began planning to build new naval assets. This period coincided with the rise of Kim Jong Un, who was involved in the decision-making around the Yonpyong shelling. When he took power the following year, he was politically locked in. He couldn't reverse the hardline decisions he had been a part of. He had to double down. Initially, Kim Jong-un invested most resources into strengthening his missile and nuclear forces and his submarine fleet, a classic asymmetric strategy. But as inter-Korean relations completely collapsed after 2021, and Kim began openly speaking of the two Koreas as separate, hostile states, the strategy shifted. To prepare for a potential full-scale war, North Korea began planning to design and build large surface warships. They decided to skip several weight classes. Despite having no experience with such vessels, they went straight to a destroyer-class project. In reality, this new destroyer is more of an experimental platform than a true combat vessel, armed with far more weaponry than it likely needs. Because North Korea took such a massive and ambitious leap, the accident involving the second ship of its class was, in a way, an expected surprise. As for whether this rapid naval expansion can actually change the fate of the West Sea-5 Islands, that now depends on whether North Korea's military-industrial complex can prove its resilience after this very public failure.